Today, we're here with Robert Hamilton. He's a retired professional with a productive career in communications and strategic business planning within the federal government. Currently, he serves as the president of Humanist Ottawa, where he champions secular values and humanist principles. As a board director of Street Epistemology International, Robert advocates for a more rational and reasoned world through civil discourse. A committed atheist and secular humanist, he passionately supports reason and rationality in social causes. Robert is a strong believer in the power of partnerships and collaborative efforts in advocacy. He's an active event organizer, both online and in person, and is a member of several humanist and atheist organizations, including the Ontario Humanist Society, Humanist Canada, Humanist International, Atheist Republic, and Centre for Inquiry Canada. Today, we will be having the pleasure of Robert presenting why do we need a new enlightenment. Then we'll follow up with a short interview asking some follow-up questions. Robert, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, for that wonderful introduction. I just mentioned, of course, that I'm also on the board of the New Enlightenment Project, and so that the question that gets asked is, why do we need? What do you mean by New Enlightenment, and why is that? Why do we need that? So why do we need a new enlightenment? We're talking a little bit here about justice and social justice, and the relationship between woke ideologies and traditional enlightenment values, and whether or not traditional enlightenment values are up to the task of the nature of polarization of discourse that we face today. So woke ideology and enlightenment values represent two distinct frameworks for understanding and addressing societal issues, each with its own unique principles and goals. So the Enlightenment values emphasize reason, individualism, and universal human rights. These principles advocate for the pursuit of knowledge, scientific inquiry, and the belief in inherent equality and the dignity of all individuals. In contrast, woke ideology seeks to address and rectify social injustice, particularly those related to race, gender, and sexuality. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing systemic inequalities and the lived experience of marginalized groups. So while both frameworks aim to create a more just society, they differ in their approaches. Enlightenment values focus on universal principles and rational discourse, whereas woke ideologies prioritize social justice and the acknowledgement of historical and ongoing oppression. The intersection and sometimes the tension between these two perspectives highlight the evolving nature of societal values and the ongoing struggle to balance individual rights and collective justice. So what do we mean by Enlightenment values? Just as a quick overview, what I mean by Enlightenment values are the key principles of reason, valuing reason, science, and empirical evidence, respect of universal human rights, and respect of the individual, and equality before the law, that everyone is equal before the law. By contrast, woke ideologies focus on social justice and systemic changes, emphasizing group identities and the lived experience of those within those groups, and addressing historical and structural inequalities that have a long history. Looking at that and seeing what can be done on that score. So you take a look at some general themes, the differences between these two different approaches. With respect to, on the Enlightenment side, there's the valuing of universal principles applicable to all individuals. On the woke side, recognizing unique experiences between different social groups is very important, supremely important, and looking for solutions that have tailored strategies to address specific disparities that can be identified with oppressed groups. There is also a difference in terms of what is considered fair. In Enlightenment perspective, we pursue fairness through equal treatment under the law as being fair and impartial, and that success is merit-based and progress is based on the abilities of the individual. Woke perspective on this is that to address systemic biases through true equality, and that equity is better than or an improvement over mere equality. So looking at a greater emphasis on those outcomes. There is also a difference in terms of the division of labor as an inequality within society. Oftentimes people say, well, there's there with some groups who have different roles, either traditionally or currently, that this division of labor causes a power differential between groups and individuals, and that this is perhaps one of the differences in the view between woke and Enlightenment values. The focus here is on the how you value these differences. It's not that there are differences in roles, but how those roles are valued differently, and that value has a direct practical implication in terms of people's status, income, and power disparities. So there's other aspects with respect to how each group is fundamentally approaching the problem of justice. Epistemology, the study of how we know what we know, is fundamentally different between a woke perspective and an enlightened perspective. And from an enlightened perspective, we look at knowledge through reason and empirical evidence, the scientific approach, and reasoned rational discourse. Woke ideology focuses on social power dynamics and the lived experience of people within marginalized groups. So this causes a difference between what one considers to be true, or what one considers knowledge is. And so this as mediated through language is one of the big differences between Enlightenment and woke ideology. As for various social justice principles, I think what I'm going to do is I can summarize some of these in terms of the general principles in terms or areas of approach between social justice and between social justice on the woke side and then on the Enlightenment side. But these are the 10 general areas of social justice where there is a difference of approach in terms of the difference between equality, equity, access to justice, the participation and who participates with respect to justice and rectifying social injustice, the recognition of those who are from a woke perspective, being oppressed from a power differential, dismantling racial discrimination based on gender, and then various aspects of justice from economics perspective. Restorative justice refers to the idea of reparations for past injustice, looking at environmental justice or eco justice in terms of how the woke perspective deals with that as a cultural issue, and then intergenerational justice on correcting injustices that have occurred from one generation to the next historically. And so there's a difference between that on the woke side and on the Enlightenment side, and I can sort of get into that a little later if you want. The areas of overlap between these two, where is the common ground between the woke and the Enlightenment side, is that both sides advocate for equal rights and opportunities. There is a recognition of pursuit of equality from that perspective, from this foundation of fairness, and a valuing of the importance of knowledge and critical thinking. On the Enlightenment side, that critical thinking is based on reason and scientific inquiry. On the woke side, that's based on taking into account inclusion and recognition of diverse curricula. So a broadening view of education. But this is an area that both sides value in terms of their perspective on things. Where they diverge and where the area of disagreement and grievance has to do with universalism from the Enlightenment perspective versus the tailored, individualized, group-based approach for equality on the woke side of things. And then there's this big difference, of course, between the concept of respecting the individual versus expecting the emphasis on the overall social group. Okay, so how does this work in terms of a new enlightenment? How can one bring this together in terms of how could you where do we can we revise this dialogue between and this tension between a solution to social justice, between enlightenment values in the context of woke ideologies? So we can look at strengthening individual rights and agency. Woke ideologies often emphasize group identity and collective experience. A revision could highlight the importance of individual agency within these frameworks, ensuring that people are not solely defined by their group identity, but also recognized for their unique personal choices, achievements, and responsibilities. This would align with the Enlightenment's focus on primacy of the individual, advocating the systemic change should empower individuals rather than position them as mere passive recipients of group narrative. We could also look at a revision to embracing universal principles alongside intersectionality. While intersectionality provides valuable insights on how multiple identities intersect, a revision could balance this by reaffirming a commitment to universal human rights. This means ensuring that while group-based differences are acknowledged, they do not supersede the idea that every individual should be treated with the same fundamental rights and dignity. So the goal would be to integrate particularism, that is group identity, without losing the sight of universalism, shared humanity. We can also look at encouraging reasoned debate and discourse. This is an area that I'm particularly interested in. Enlightenment values place high emphasis on reasoned debate and free exchange of ideas. Woke ideologies can sometimes appear to discourage open discourse by deeming certain topics off limit or labeling them as inherently oppressive. This is the cancel culture. A revision could involve fostering an environment where difficult conversations are not avoided but navigated through thoughtfully. This would mean promoting critical dialogue as a tool for growth rather than conflict, ensuring that even dissenting voices are engaged respectfully and constructively. We can look at focusing on systems and not just narratives. While woke frameworks often highlight the importance of narrative and lived experiences, they could benefit from integrating a more structural analysis that emphasizes reasoned, data-driven approaches to social reform. This is science and evidence-based. This would involve supplementing personal stories with empirical research and policy analysis, maintaining a balance between the emotional appeal of narratives and the rational strength of evidence. So we can also look at acknowledging that the human condition is complex. Enlightenment values recognize the complexity and fluidity of human nature, promoting a holistic view of individuals beyond their group membership. Revising woke ideologies could involve avoiding essentializing identities and allowing for more nuanced understandings of people's beliefs and behaviors. This means recognizing that people can hold a mix of privileges and disadvantages, and that these identities are not fixed or determinative of one's worth or potential. So this seeming dichotomy can be integrated. We can also look at promoting ethical universalism over cultural relativism. Woke ideology sometimes leans towards a form of cultural relativism, where all group perspectives are considered equally valid. A revision could involve embracing ethical universalism, where certain core values, such as human rights and freedom of expression, are upheld consistently, even when cultural norms might challenge them. This approach could help integrate Enlightenment principles of human rights without disregarding the significance of diverse cultural perspectives. We can also look at refining social justice to include personal responsibilities. This is respect of the individual. Enlightenment thought often balances social progress with personal responsibility. Revising woke ideologies could involve incorporating more emphasis on how individuals can exercise agency within oppressive systems and take part in self-empowerment. This doesn't mean ignoring systemic barriers, but rather acknowledging that personal initiatives and self-improvement can coexist with systemic critique. We can also look at redefining power dynamics as dynamic and static. This is the fluidity of the human condition. A common criticism of woke ideology is that it can frame power dynamics as static and deterministic, like there are oppressors and there are oppressed. A revision might introduce a more dynamic view of power, recognizing that power is context dependent and can shift across different social, economic, and political spheres. This would allow for more flexible understanding of how power operates and empower all individuals to act as agents of change in line with the Enlightenment ideals of self-determination and perspective of the individual, of course. So there you go. There's some thoughts on how and why we need a new enlightenment and what can be done to do that. I think it's a big project, and I think the new enlightenment project is up to that task.
Some questions come to mind from the presentation.
Mhm.
So I do not see freedom of expression if using the Canadian context, or free speech if using the American context as a left or right social or political issue. I see it as what it is titled, freedom of expression, as in and of itself. So when, as you mentioned in the presentation, some ideas may be presented as oppressive or framed in a narrative and interpreted as such. Uh, I think about the extension of that from ideas to identities identified as oppressive. So, in a context where individuals, based on their either self-identified or appointed by others identities, they get labeled as oppressors in and of themselves. What does this do in the context of uh, free speech, discourse, open dialogue, and so on? I do not necessarily mean within the context of an academic environment.
Well, it seems to be quite simple that people are not their ideas. People can change their mind. People can adopt new ideas and learn new things. So a person may identify with a certain set of ideas or not, and can through learning and understanding and dialogue and exchange come to adopt new ideas and different ideas and abandon other ideas. And so it's not a question of identity. I think if you focus on the individuals, you are a representative of this idea. Okay, well, you can sort of go down that road that far, but people are not their ideas.
So, could this new enlightenment frame prevent the reification of ideas into the people who happen to be harboring them at any one time?
Could you rephrase that question?
Sure. So could this new enlightenment frame of mind provide a basis for stere for stopping the stereotyping of people who happen to hold a particular belief at any given time?
Yes,
So individuals in Canada, at least, can exercise their freedom of expression rights more freely.
that's right. Yes, yeah. I think that it promoting open dialogue and discussion, even across deeply held beliefs, is on the whole a positive thing for society and social progress. And so anything which can help to ensure that dynamic, fluid, and open dialogue is a net plus. Even though from the woke perspective, certain topics are kind of kryptonite. That I think that needs to be resisted. I think for sure. Uh, any idea can should be subject to review and critical analysis.
Are human rights a good presentation of an ethical system grounded and universalism opposed to cultural relativism's particularism?
I think that human rights are international human rights is an intrinsic right respected at an international level. In terms of particularism, it applies to the individual as well as it applies to societies as a whole. So human rights are fundamental, regardless of what group or group identity or what person uh, says they belong to or not. So is that answer your question? I'm not sure. Did I get the question right?
To a degree.
Okay.
What parts of uh, woke philosophy versus, let's call it, New Enlightenment philosophy are probably the biggest sticking points for debate, free dialogue, and advancing some common objectives that people who adhere to both might be wanting to advance?
I think the biggest sticking points are self-generated by both sides. That is to say, both sides are quite predisposed to strawmanning the other side, and railing against a position that the other side is not taking. So when on the Enlightenment side, saying, well, the cancel culture is uh, uh, stifling free speech. There are that's from an enlightened perspective. That's one thing. On the woke side, they don't see that as canceling. They see that as that there are there's a framework in which dialogue can occur, and sometimes dialogue attempts to occur outside of that framework. So in the end, um, dialogue is better than no dialogue, and that's where the rubber meets the road, right? So I think that if both sides can work towards this seed of common ground, which is wanting to pursue a framework which leads to growth of a society and well-being of the individual, then there is we can see how that there can be a bridging of that divide.
I think it's a wonderful final note of optimism for this particular presentation and brief interview. Robert, thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott.
You have been listening to New Enlightenment Project Vice President Robert Hamilton in conversation with NEP Director of Advocacy Scott Jacobsen. Robert's presentation and the subsequent discussion why we need a new enlightenment in contemporary times defines our movement. The New Enlightenment Project is committed to increasing civil discussion of difficult or controversial topics, and we offer a series of podcasts to further that aim. You can visit our website at nep-humanism.ca, where you can browse our blog, watch more interviews in this series, become a member, or make a donation. We are also on Facebook. You can subscribe to our podcasts and webinars at YouTube at nep-humanism.